Thank you for being here to be part of our inaugural Backcountry Symposium. We have about 150 people registered to be with us here today. I'm Breeze Richardson. I'm the Executive Director of Aspen Public Radio, and we've proudly produced today's event in collaboration with this remarkable community space, TACAW. I think a handful of people have come from elsewhere in the valley, and this might be their first time here at TACAW, so welcome and check out the building and enjoy the resource fair outside. I have the pleasure, along with Greg Albright, who's also with Aspen Public Radio, to host the stage for you here today, so welcome. And this is our first panel of the day, Documenting Responsibly in the Backcountry. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Aspen Public Radio's Kyle Williams, along with local photographers and filmmakers Pete McBride, Michelle Smith, and Sierra Schlag for a conversation exploring the significant responsibilities when filming and sharing adventures from remote backcountry spaces. Thanks.
Well, thank you all for being here and taking time out from a gorgeous, gorgeous day outside. I'd love to start with just an introduction of our panelists. We've got some heavy hitters up here and some really cool ones. Just to my left here is Michelle Smith, a filmmaker who has worked on projects like Transcendence, about an adaptive cyclist turned adaptive climber. We have Sierra Schlag, you might recognize her from Advice for Girls, which packed TACAW last year, and some of her footage is playing behind us right now. We also have Pete McBride, a filmmaker and photographer. Work has appeared in everything from National Geographic to various film festivals and several books as well. Thank you all for being here. And I'd love to start with just how you choose these projects. All of you do things that on the front end look really cool, but also have a message behind them. So Michelle, we'll start with you. What speaks to you when you're deciding what you're going to spend all of your time doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that I have to be passionate about on kind of a more personal level. You know, filmmaking, it can be very time consuming, and you know, you want to make sure that it's something that kind of speaks to you and that your subject speaks to you. And it's just something that, you know, you feel like you can devote a lot of time to working on. So, yeah.
Awesome. And Sierra, we just saw some clips from your upcoming film there. Tell me a bit about not only how you choose your projects, but what we're getting a sneak peek of behind us.
Yeah, so with skiing, I've worked on 4 projects, and half of them have been my own idea, and half of them have just brought me in to collaborate on. And the 2 that were my own idea are kind of just things that are true to me. It's one was about my grief, and the other one is about my Japanese American identity, which is those clips right there. And the other 2, I think, similar with Michelle, I just want to make sure that like aligns with me, and it's a story that I feel comfortable telling and being a part of, and something that I'm going to be proud of at the end of the day.
And Pete, likewise, how do you decide where you're going to go when you are documenting these places that very few people get the privilege to go?
Yeah, it's first, thanks for having us, and thanks to TACAW and Aspen Public Radio. I started out working in the magazine world, and so I used to get assigned to go to places for National Geographic or Outside or Smithsonian or whoever, and that world has changed. And I transitioned to more in film. And what's also changed in my time is I've seen the places that I used to go and document these beautiful wild places are also changing drastically. Obviously, we've had the record temperatures on the planet. Every day, every month seems to be a new record. So I try to find stories that incorporate outdoor, often adventure, but the adventure is the backbone to talk about a bigger issue: water conservation, river, public lands, native voices. And so I try to find ways to weave those 2 together, the personal, the macro, and the micro and the macro kind of concept.
Now, speaking of native voices, we have a clip that we're going to play in just a minute here, but this is a project that is one of your current projects. Michelle has been working on it as well and really cranked to make sure we could get this clip, so I'm very grateful for that. Michelle, I'd love for you to first lend some insight into what we're about to see because you just cut it together. And then Pete, tell me a little bit about the story behind it, and then we'll take a look.
Yeah, I mean, I put this clip together very quickly. We're trying to kind of put together a rough cut right now. So we wanted to kind of have something to show for today and just to kind of give a little sneak peek of the project that we're working on. And it is about Native voices and a very relevant and important topic right now. I'm going to let Pete talk about the film itself since he shot it and kind of started this project. So
Yeah, it's a personal project, and it came to me a few years back. I did a short little walk in the park. Walked 800 miles from east to west through the entire length of the Grand Canyon National Park for National Geographic. Kind of a thirsty affair. There's not a trail from east to west, so it was a bit of a scratchy affair too. And that was a story using adventure to talk about the threats at the time happening in Grand Canyon National Park. And one of the threats has been an ongoing issue around uranium mining. Uranium may be a fuel for the future, but it contaminates water very easily, and once it does, you can't get it out of the water system. So they mine very deeply, 3,000 feet generally, and there's been a slurry of mines and a history of mining, history around Grand Canyon National Park. There's an active mine just a few hundred yards from the park boundary. And when I did that walk, I filmed some Native American Havasupai tribal members protesting in front of this active mine called Pinyon Mine today, which is currently pulling and transporting uranium. And this last August, amazingly, after watching this young group band of Havasupai, which I was like, this is impressive, powerful voice they have, but how are they really going to make a difference against a multinational mining company? And one of the members there was a 9-year-old young woman named Maya Talusi. Well, her mother went on and organized 13 tribes and made a new coalition. And last August, they made a new national monument called Ancestral Footprints Grand Canyon National Monument to prevent all new uranium mining. They grandfathered in the current Pinyon Mine, which is extracting uranium, but the story is about Maya, who grew up protesting and went on to introduce not only the national monument, but the President of the United States when they announced it. So to see this one really remarkable young Native woman doing that, I realized that we need to do a short profile film about it.
Awesome, well, let's take a look.
thanks, Pete.
My name is Maya Little. I'm a 17-year-old high school student. I'm from the Grand Canyon, the Havasupai tribe, and the people of the blue-green waters. I love everything about the Grand Canyon. Probably my favorite thing is the water. I loved hiking to the falls with my brother and playing there with my cousins. My mom's been fighting water for years, as long as I can remember.
My name is Carletta Talusi. I'm a Havasupai, born and raised in the canyon. The oldest water that they've ever studied and ever found.
It runs right through our village. Contamination could really harm us.
They're currently extracting uranium on top of our aquifer, the Red Wall Moab Aquifer. The Red Wall Moab Aquifer not only drains into Havasu Creek, it eventually drains into the Colorado River. And all the people living downstream is susceptible to water contamination. We have a religious and cultural connection to the Grand Canyon since the beginning of time.
The water that runs through our village is very sacred to us, and our whole livelihood is based around it. It's just a really important thing for us to work to protect. My name is Maya Little. I'm a 17-year-old high school student.
Thanks.
Thanks for cutting that, Michelle.
Yeah.
Huge kudos for that as well.
I'll add one note. One thing that's great about filmmaking is it's a team sport, and it's a lot of work, and you can really burn a lot of time on it. And sometimes you find partners to work with, and I've worked with Michelle for a long time, and basically I dump a lot of puzzle pieces on the table. I have this amount of footage and this story arc, and we're going to make this beautiful thing. Go figure it out. Help me sort it out. And when you get good editors, it's really rewarding because they bring their thought process to it, and they start creating a puzzle in a way that you didn't always anticipate. And so it's a real joy. It's hard, and you earn your turns on it, so to speak. But that's also the pleasure.
Yes, glad we could put something together quickly. So.
Excellent. Well, as we're on the topic of current projects, Sierra, I'd love for you to share a little bit more about what you're working on now. As you've mentioned, your storytelling explores not only skiing, but things like identity and grief and loss. What was the inspiration for this upcoming film of yours, and how has it felt to tell this story yourself?
So the film I'm working on releasing this fall is called Nisei, which is the Japanese word for children born in North America from Japanese immigrant parents. My mom's from Japan. And in 2019, I went there. It was the first time I went to Japan without my mom, and first time I realized that when I go to Japan, I'm very much seen as white, and I'm not really accepted by them. And it was the first time I really took a look at my identity, and I was like, okay, when I'm in Japan, I'm seen as white, but when I'm in America, I'm just seen as Asian. And it was something I've been processing for a really long time, and skiing in Japan is obviously amazing. So got to a point where I was like, I should make a film about this. And my segment in Advice for Girls was kind of all around my Japanese American identity, and I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into it. So this is more of an artistic, creative story, just kind of figuring out my identity. And it's a lifelong process, but this film definitely helped me figure it out a little bit more.
Has the process of making this film changed how you see things, how you think about the way you go around the world?
For sure. I think it just brought me at peace a little bit more with my identity. And I brought my film crew to Japan, and it was their first time there. I've been going there since I was born. And to bring people kind of with wide eyes who have never kind of experienced it before also taught me a little bit of perspective there. And it taught me how they navigate through these new spaces that I've been very comfortable in for the past few years. So yeah, it was helpful for sure.
Awesome. Now we're looking, we've seen clips already, and we're talking today about films that have an impact or that resonate in a way that is more cultural or intellectual than just the awesome ski footage, which is also very awesome, or the awesome river footage, which is also fantastic to watch. Now I'm curious, the title for today's conversation is documenting responsibly in the backcountry. Does responsibility feel like the right word for what we're talking about here? Do you feel an obligation as a storyteller to do something that is meaningful and impactful? Michelle, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's just so much content out there right now. I mean, it's overwhelming. You get on Instagram, TikTok, Strava. I mean, the list goes on, and you can just sit there and just scroll. And, there's a lot out there of just people, with pretty photos and just a selfie of them in whatever location. And it's just kind of oh, look at what I did today. And it's so easy now to actually have an impact for your audience on what are you actually doing out there and why are you doing it. So just trying to give meaning to whatever it is that you're posting and kind of educate or inspire or, tell a little story while you're making that post or putting your piece of content out there, and how easy it is to do that. And I just think it's very responsible and important to do that in a world right now where everything is being loved to death and everything's being used to death, and it's so easy to just get out and follow somebody's map on Strava and go out into the backcountry, and just how to, make that content a little more impactful and tell a story behind it when you're doing that. So
Seeing some nods from Sierra. Do you resonate with that sentiment?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think my favorite part of showing the films that I've worked on is talking to people that have connected with it. But again, too, like more people are accessing the backcountry and they see these clips in like the big ski films each fall and they're like, I want to do that, but don't get the education. So I think that is also a part of it, of like, I'm going and filming in primarily the backcountry and I'm having conversations with my crew. Just because there's a camera out doesn't mean I'm just gonna go ski whatever line. Like, we're making educated backcountry decisions and having those conversations, and there's so much that goes into making these films that you obviously don't see, and you just see the cool powder shots. And but yeah, having those conversations are really, really important, and being able to tell the audience that you're having those conversations is also important.
Awesome, and we'll get into that safety stuff in just a little bit here. Michelle, you mentioned the phrase "love to death." That was something that, Pete, you've mentioned as well in some of our conversations in the past. Talk a little bit about, environmental responsibility or stewardship in that context of places potentially being loved to death or over-visited and used.
I think that is a critical subject in today's world, because we have better ability, better access, better tools to document these places than we've ever had before, and with GPS and maps. And with that, I believe there does come a responsibility, and we need more education on our impact in wilderness. The traces we leave used to be leave no trace, which seems obvious to me, but there's a lot of people that see our wilderness, our backcountry area, as a backdrop of entertainment and less of a place of reverence, and something that is kind of, as many native cultures think it is, their outdoor open-aired cathedrals. And so if you were to go to a cathedral in Europe, you would give the same respect that that religious community would offer that place. I'd like to hope so, at least. And I think we need to kind of bring that reverence back a little bit more to our wild places, and think about it not just from the visual, beautiful backdrop for your selfie and your social media, but the wild critters that live there, the ecosystems that sustain not just that place, but also us. And so I'm trying to, like Michelle said, like both are working on to create stories that aren't just an adding to the noise. Impact isn't just likes on social. Impact is actually making people think and ponder, and sometimes those stories of showing that aren't the easy stories to tell. They're not the obvious ones. So I think, like, Maya Toulouse is not an obvious story, but a lot of people that go to the Grand Canyon don't know that there are 11 Native American tribal communities that actually live within and around Grand Canyon National Park. It's symbolic of many of our national parks and public lands. And many of those Native communities were living in that national park when we made it a national park, so they were kicked out. We have this idea that national parks were always empty wilderness places, but in fact they weren't. So there's a respect and responsibility to make people aware of that as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, speaking of things to make you all ponder, our next clip is a clip related to Peace Project Seeing Silence, which is all about reverence for natural places and also the ways in which our busy, constant world has added noise to places that have historically been silent, and also honoring that silence that does still exist. So let's take a look.
I've been lucky to explore many remote wonders of our world. By pedal, by skis, and by foot. And I'm often in awe of the sights this challenged world still provides. But over the years, I've also learned that there is one vista we often overlook, because it is not visible with the eye. It is only heard with the ear. Silence, and the sublime layers of natural sounds that often mix with quiet, are the least appreciated in today's busy world. Yet the solace of silence is not only important to the health of our wild places, but also for us.
Now, when we think about protecting places like this, people start with you. What are some best practices for people who are going out and adventuring in the backcountry, but also people who are going out and documenting those adventures themselves?
I would think one good practice is don't go into the backcountry with your speakers rocking out, which sounds obvious, but I see it over and over now. I love adventure sports, I love mountain biking, but I don't love it when I go out into that world and I see other people sharing that, but also sharing it with their volume at 11 so everyone else can hear it. And it's like this roaming, like their own personal soundscape. So I think it's good to go into these places and think not just of the visual, but that soundscape. And soundscapes are remarkably important to our wilderness areas. A lot of species rely on soundscapes, and there's been people who have studied this for years, and it used to be that wilderness was defined by 15 minutes of uninterrupted natural sound, not silence void of sound, but silence defined by natural sound, not mechanical human noise. And now it's hard to find more than 5 minutes, and I've tested that even here at Maroon Bells. I've gone out at night and done time lapses out there, and it's hard to find. I kept a counter throughout the night, and I think at 5 minutes and 15 seconds was the longest period. That's because jet travel is so consistent at night. So that's just another thing to think about. Obviously, leave no trace, but your trace can be incorporated with the soundscape that you create as well. Be quiet, be humble, be respectful of others around you, but especially the species that you're actually going into their realm, their world. So think of that.
Mm-hmm. Michelle, Sierra, any thoughts on best practices that you bring to the wilderness to make sure you are not leaving too much of an impact there?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when you're out there, I have to tell myself this all the time, is like, be in the moment and enjoy being there for being there. Like, a lot of times I'm thinking about, oh, how am I gonna set up my next photo or my next shot? Or I'm thinking about the film I'm editing, or, I'm not in the moment of being in that place. And that's why I'm out there, is to experience being in a natural place. So I find myself a lot like, okay, keep my phone or my camera put away and, keep it in my backpack and not just think about, documenting every single thing, even though I'm a documentary filmmaker and you want to get, a lot of footage and everything. But just keep in mind, like, you're there to be there and not for just getting the shot. So enjoy your time there in the moment. That's what I can say.
Yeah.
I would say entering it with a place of respect, and respect for where you're traveling, the people that have been on that land before you and have taken care of it, and also leaving your ego. We're at the trailhead, maybe. I think living in this valley, there are so many people who are so talented and athletic and amazing, and we get caught up with like conquering the next line and doing all these things when like we need to, I don't know, have a little bit more respect for the places that we recreate in.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Now, looking through a different lens of responsibility here and thinking about social responsibility, Sierra, one of your recent projects, you're a producer and a star in Advice for Girls, which is an all-female ski movie that covers so many different elements of identity and experience as skiers. This is not just one type of female skier or just one type of skier. There are, of course, I think some snowboarders represented as well. But when you think about representation and authentic storytelling, Sierra, what are some best practices for people who want to really capture the full spectrum of the skiing community in a way that is thoughtful?
Totally. I think the way we went about it was obviously reaching out to people we thought would be a great fit for the film, and then letting them kind of dictate their own story. I think sometimes people can get caught up of like, oh, this person's really cool, I want to tell their story, but like maybe don't check in with them throughout the entire like process of creating, whether that's just like a YouTube video or like a full-on documentary. And so we wanted to make sure that we were like checking in with our film subjects and participants of like, do you like how your segment is ending up? Do you like the flow of this? Because we want them to be able to tell their own story how they want it to show up. And a big thing with Advice for Girls was we just weren't seeing that representation of like people that look like me. I never thought that I could be a pro skier because I never saw like a multiracial woman skiing. And so we were making the space for ourselves because we thought that it was honestly time for, more than just the token female to show up in these feature-length films every fall.
Mm-hmm. Michelle, I'd love your thoughts on this as well. A lot of your short films feature such a wide variety of subjects. There's things like The Frenchie, which for folks who may know the Frenchie here in the Valley, kind of a kooky local legend. I'm very enthusiastic. And then there are also films like Transcendence, which is about adaptive sports and healing from traumatic injury. What is your sort of mindset or your approach to make sure, again, that those stories are told thoughtfully and authentically?
Yeah, I mean, you really have to get to know your characters and the people that you're telling the story about before you even turn the camera on, before you even start rolling on the camera. Like with Jacques, he loves attention. I don't know if you
Jacques being
Jacques
the Frenchie.
Buot, I don't know if you guys all know him in the Valley. He's been here forever, but he loves you can just start using the camera and he just immediately just puts on a show. But as overbearing as he can be, we became very good friends throughout the process of making that film. And, he now considers me a family member. He comes over whenever he feels like and just walks in through the front door, no matter what time of day, and sits down and has dinner with us, or comes to my son's, football game or whatever. So, when you decide to make a film or, produce content about somebody, it's just so important to get to know them on a personal level and really, care about them as a person and a human. And the more that you can do that, the better film you're going to make and the more impact you're going to have on people that watch that film. It's the same thing with Adrian Costa, who was the star in Transcendence. He's 24 years old. I'm 44, so sometimes I felt like I was his mom. But we had a very relatable experience. Like, I also had a really bad accident up on the Grand Teton in Wyoming back in 2010. I didn't lose my leg, but I shattered my leg, I broke my back, I was a long recovery, I had to be helicopter rescued off of there. And we kind of had a similar path in that, we wanted to, have a experience, in the mountains to grow as a person and beyond just like, oh, I want to do this line, or I want to, push myself in a certain way on the mountain. It was more like, no, I want to grow as a person through the process of, being an athlete in the mountains. So we had a very relatable experience, even though I was a lot older than him and in a different part of my life, but we really got to know each other kind of on that personal level when we decided to make the film. So
And it's worth noting that if you just heard about Michelle's experience, you're like, that's crazy, how did you survive? She actually filmed the whole thing while she was being rescued. And so that was kind of your breakout project. Just tell us a little bit about that for a moment, because I think it might come up if people start to Google you after this conversation.
Yeah, back in 2010, I was doing kind of a mixed route on the northwest side of the Grand Teton that involved some ice climbing and some mixed climbing. And I was on this traverse, this like hanging snowfield on this 2,000-foot cliff. And I made a route finding error. Like, you had to cross this traverse to actually get on the climb itself. And I made a route finding error on the traverse and ended up losing my footing on this really thin piece of ice that I just couldn't get purchase on. And we had one rope between my partner and I and just a sling around a horn holding us onto the mountain on really crappy, sketchy rock. So when I fell, I ended up falling like 60 feet, pendulum swing. So I was like hitting stuff as I was falling, came to rest from the fall, and immediately realized I was really messed up. Like, my lower leg was just in the wrong direction and like up to the side. And I mean, my back was, I knew I messed up my back. And yeah, we had to, my partner was able to come down to me. He was able to get in touch with, call 911, even though where we were on the Tetons, we were on the Idaho side. And I guess he got through to the Wyoming side, and they told us to hang up and get in touch with the Idaho side of search and rescue. And we're like, no, like, someone needs to come and rescue us. So anyway, minor detail. But, during the process, we had to wait about 5 hours until, the helicopter came. And during that process, we decided, okay, let's document this. This is like a live rescue that's happening here in a very precarious spot on the Teton, on the Grand Teton. So we kind of documented the rescue from start to finish, and it helped pass the time. So, and I was, I was kind of in shock at the time. So, even though it was a very kind of traumatic experience being up there, because my body kind of went into this like survival mode, and I was kind of in shock during that experience, I was actually able to stay pretty calm. So believe it or not, when you're in a really bad situation, your body can be very resilient and rise to the occasion, and you kind of forget about the pain you're in or the danger that you're in, and your coping skills can really come into play and be a lot better than you thought they ever could be. So yeah, if you want to watch it, if you Google Michelle Smith and Grand Teton, you can find a 2010 made iMovie film about it. The production value is not very good, but it's worth watching if you want to see what a rescue is like. So
awesome. Now, returning to the idea of kind of ethical storytelling, Pete, a lot of the projects that you work on don't only feature human voices and human subjects, but also wildlife who you cannot interview, of course, but you can represent them in different ways. What is your approach, your mindset to give a voice to these creatures who are quite literally voiceless?
It's challenging. It tests your patience. I think Sierra put it well when she said, check your ego at the trailhead. I think humility is one of the key things in telling stories with other cultures. Oftentimes, even with other cultures I don't know or work with that often, I may not be the right person to tell that story. I often tell them, but if they don't have anybody else, I'm the only one. So I show up, I don't bring my cameras out, I try to create a human relationship. And then with wildlife, I've had some unique experiences where I think humility is key. Trust is actually very key. I've had some experiences where I was documenting orca in the Arctic of Norway. I was doing a story for Smithsonian, and it was polar night, so the sun wasn't coming above the horizon, and we were getting in very inky, dark waters, 38-degree temperature, very thick, kind of closed cell wetsuits, not dry suits, and I was trying to actually do a story on the orca and their migratory feeding pattern around herring up there, and they're soundscapes, so they actually do have an amazing voice. They sing and echolocate a lot and click. But they also have a silent language that we can't hear, but they use a lot, just like bats. And they're critical in the ocean, and they use sonar. So I had this very unusual relationship where I had to check my ego and kind of swallow my fear. And I got in the water with a pod of orca. They've never had a violent encounter with humans in the wild. They've had captivated orca have attacks, but never in the wild. So I knew that was going on my side. And it was near dark, but I saw a male orca swimming towards me, and the dorsal fin, just for perspective, was 6 feet. So his top fin is taller than I am tall. And I'm like, oh boy, he's coming right at me. And I take a big breath, and I'm a terrible free diver, and I'm holding my breath for about 12 seconds in that water temperature, and I'm going down to take a picture, and he swims right at me. And then right as I take the picture, he gives me but there's no sound. It's like, boom, and he hits me with a blast of sonar, and my heart basically goes up into my mouth and comes back down. It was perhaps one of the most spiritual wildlife encounters I've ever had. And I was like, oh my God, I just got high-fived by this freaking 28-foot, male orca. And then he came back and started playing with me, and he was showing me who's boss. And of course, because I can barely move in that water, and they were corralling the herring. And then he came up and blew bubbles in my face and started putting his pectoral and dorsal fin over me. And I was like, okay, buddy, I get it. I suck at swimming. You're much better. But that was just a really, really special experience. You don't always have that. Just one last point on wildlife is you have to go in with patience and understand that you may have a concept of what you want, but in today's world with stressed populations and habitat loss and corridor loss, we have it in this valley, you're dealing with a very unpredictable, stressed species. And so you don't want your ego and your idea of what you want to document or photograph or film clip that you want to make is going to add more stress to that animal. So you have to go in very, very kind of patiently and thoughtful and be really as much of a biologist as you are a documentarian.
Mm-hmm. Do you sense that the wildlife, especially when you're shooting from far away or in a secluded location, do you think that they can sense the camera in the way that we humans can sometimes sense that we're being photographed?
I mean, it's a great question. We like to anthropomorphize wildlife all the time and think they know what we know. I would say that in some ways, wildlife is I've worked with a wide range of species. Orca's brain is 33% bigger than ours, so I think it would be arrogant of us to think that they aren't as intelligent as us. I would think they're probably quite a bit more intelligent than we are. So I think they're pretty aware of what's going on. Do they know the camera? I don't know. They do often see the reflection in the camera. And that can go both ways. That can go good or bad. Often with sharks, I've had sharks come at me, and they see the reflection of themselves in the dome of my lens underwater, and they keep coming, and I have to kind of give them a doink in the nose, be like, nope, this is glass. It's not another one. So I don't know. It's a good question, but I do think that given when wildlife is not stressed and you give them the chance to be themselves, they are as curious and intrigued and kind of intelligent or more so than we are. I've seen elephants come up and play with my camera. I've had bears kind of pull my camera traps down and almost try to re-trigger the camera trap. I think wildlife species are remarkable, and I think we need more people kind of trying to stand up for their voice, because as they say, a world without the wild critters, we follow that path. And so let's try to keep the wild species as around and as vibrant as we can.
Mm-hmm. Now, the conversation that we're having today is largely revolving around what I would categorize as adventure storytelling. These are the kinds of films that you would see at the 5 Point Adventure Film Festival, for instance, or something like Banff. There is a whole other genre of backcountry filmmaking that many of us enjoy going to and watching, and that is the Stoke film, which is a lot of really fun footage, just gets you hyped up for the ski season. And I noticed that those Stoke films, they tend to pack the house. Film festivals, too, can certainly pack the house, but is there an appetite for the kind of work that you are doing, the adventure storytelling. And Sierra, let's start with you.
I mean, I think there's space for both, and both are important. With Advice for Girls, I think we tried to balance the stoke with the actual storytelling. And we sold out 40 plus shows across the country. So I definitely think there's an appetite, and just the people we got to connect with and talk to, of like women finally seeing themselves on camera and being able to relate with the stories that are being told. I think with the ski industry specifically, like, we know the TGRs, we know the matchsticks, we know that there's gonna be sick Alaska spines every year, but we won't always know that we're gonna be like, oh, I could probably do that, or I totally get what they're saying with their experience in the ski industry. And I think there's a growing appetite for it, and people are like hungry for people to connect with a little bit more, instead of just being like, we're watching powder skiing, which is great too. So there's space for both, but I think there's a growing appetite for people actually wanting to connect and make skiing feel more real, I guess, instead of unattainable.
Yeah. Now, Pete, for you as somebody who works both in film and photography, things that most people might see in magazines, what is the commercial appetite these days as you know, the publishing industry changes for the kind of work that you do?
It's a changing landscape, I will definitely say. I started being a photographer in the late 90s when National Geographic had 44 million readers. They're less than one now. They have a large social media presence, but everybody expects content to be free, and so how things get funded is different. So I think what's interesting is that the entry level to make story content is much easier now with drones, and I mean, our phones take better pictures than my old Nikons used to, or even my original Sony cameras. However, I think to this day, and I tell young filmmakers and photographers that story is still kind of the key ingredient and one of the most important things. It's the king and queen of content production. Good story, even if it's about a stock film or a native culture or wildlife, you need to have a narrative arc. You need to have a story that pulls us in. We've evolved as species, as human beings, with years and years of thousands of years of story. That was our language, our story time, and that's how we kind of related as a social species. And so I think we often underestimate story, and young photographers and filmmakers do that today. And I think stories about young women skiing and showing how you can follow Sierra's path, I think is so important. And I think you can weave in stoke. And I think story, even with Michelle, like having an accident and finding a way to tell a story about her. I mean, I've seen her footage too many times. It's gruesome, but she was able to do a story around it that was rather remarkable. Mm-hmm. And so that's one thing I think that we need to work on, because in the landscape of social media, there isn't a lot of space to tell story, because our attention spans have kind of shrunk to nothing. But if you have a good story, don't be afraid of it. Still chase it.
Mm-hmm. And Michelle, I would welcome your insights. You mentioned earlier this kind of glut of content that people can go on Strava and Instagram and every possible outlet to find something that's interesting. For you as somebody who is a storyteller who's also editing content a lot and thinking about it, is it possible to still be a storyteller in these micro formats in addition to the longer stuff?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's amazing what you can do in 15 seconds to 1 minute or 2 minutes, especially with some, good editing and some good music. I mean, you can really pull people in a very short amount of time, and then hope that that's enough attention to however you decided to pull them in to continue and watch for the full 30 seconds or 1 minute. I mean, yeah, with some good editing and some good editing, tips on making, reels and very short content, it's pretty cool what you can do in a short amount of time and make an impact. And then hopefully that draws enough knowledge and attention that oh, someone might want to learn more about that, or they think, oh, that was really interesting, those 15 seconds, like, oh, there's a longer film about that, and now I want to see that film, which they can watch on, a number of platforms that are out there, on, Netflix and Outside Watch, and yeah, I mean, there's just so many platforms. So hopefully, if you can draw the attention in that short amount of time on a social media platform, and then bring someone to learn more and have more of an impact on them, that audience, in a longer format. So.
Yeah. Speaking of which, we have a 90-second clip coming up that does just that, kind of whets your appetite for the longer stuff. Let's take a look of a project that Michelle has worked on.
Adrian Costa. He's the American 17-year-old national time trial champion.
What a week for Adrian Costa.
Cycling is kind of a crazy world. I started feeling like I wasn't doing it for myself. I wanted something new and something fresh.
Woo! Golden hour in the valley, baby.
I mean, I just love climbing.
Go.
Just total focus and total immersion sort of helps me clear my mind, and so I can kind of forget about my accident.
He's still learning how to handle his frustration and stress over it.
My recovery was basically grounded in the goal of becoming a better climber than I was before, and trust that will pay off in the longer run.
We're going to attempt the first ascent of the southwest arête of El Dorado Peak.
It's really intimidating.
Every pitch just kind of kept coming. It never really got easier.
In moments like that, you can't really afford to doubt yourself. Those moments of transcendence where you're just fully believing in what you're doing.
Now, one thing that we've touched on throughout this conversation is the fact that these are risky activities. Each one of you at some point or another has been open in storytelling about kind of the physical implications of what you're doing, from Michelle's film about a rescue on the Grand Teton. Pete, I remember some very gnarly images of what your feet looked like after walking through the Grand Canyon. And Sierra, you've been very open on social media about kind of recovering from torn ACLs and things like that. And the original premise for this conversation was just about responsible, like, safety responsibilities. So I would be remiss if I didn't ask, what are you doing with your crew and with yourself to make sure that you're balancing the fun and the really cool footage with safety and making sure that other people are aware of the risks too? Sierra, let's start with you.
I think you have to choose your crew. Obviously, we're like going and boot packing up couloirs, and they're carrying really, really heavy packs, and being able to make sure that they have the fitness to do that all day and back-to-back days. And they also have the avalanche education. In case there is like an avalanche, they can come rescue you. But before we go filming for each of the segments for Advice for Girls, because each segment was a different group of people, we'd like go around the table, have a really good conversation of like what our avalanche education was, what our risk tolerance was, like what kind of level skiing we're at, and what were like our goals for the segment to film. And I think that just put a lot of people at ease, because when you're traveling in the backcountry with new people, you kind of takes a while to like learn their risk tolerance, what they're kind of about, how they travel in the backcountry, and everyone's different and not everybody gets along, and that's totally okay. And then I just brain farted, sorry. But I also think working with women has allowed like a really great space to be more open with the conversation in the backcountry. And sometimes, I'm like not trying to bash on men, but it definitely like brings a different energy when I'm going and shooting with men versus all women. And it's a much safer space to like be like, hey, I'm not comfortable doing this, and you don't feel bad about saying that, because everyone is like very open and understanding of that. And so just creating that space in the backcountry is really important, because every time you step out into the backcountry, you are learning something. It doesn't matter if you are a really certified guide or it's your first time, you will always learn something every time you go out. And so keeping that conversation open with you and your crew is really, really important.
Michelle, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, in the teaser that you guys just watched, we had to pick the film crew that was out on that mountain very carefully. You know, the guy Chris Alstrin, sorry, who filmed that. You know, he was one of the guys that was on the free solo team. You know, he does a bunch of the filming for Real Rock, and you know, you want to make sure that the person filming, you know, expeditions like that is either as good of a climber or a better climber than the people that you're actually trying to tell the story about. Because on that climb, he was the filmer that was out with Mark and Adrian. I mean, it was a first ascent. They didn't know what to expect. They ended up getting off route, and it ended up taking way longer than they thought. There was loose rocks everywhere. I mean, there was just rocks flying over their head the whole time. I mean, it was super dangerous, and they ended up having an unplanned bivvy out on the mountain that night. They ran out of food, they ran out of water, they had to spend the night out there. You know, they couldn't really see where they were very well. It was dark, they didn't know the route. And then, you know, here we've got, you know, Chris, our cinematographer, out there, and he's just like, oh my God, what have I got myself wrapped up into? But because he's been in a lot of situations like that, he was able to persevere through it. But then the next morning, you know, he did say, I'm out, I'm done. Like, you guys hired me for the day. Like, I'm over this climb sucks. Like, I want nothing to do with it. So there was actually a bailout point on the route, and he left and went back home. And then Adrian and Mark got to finish documenting the story for us with their GoPros and with their iPhones. And honestly, we got better footage when it was just the two of them, because you took like the third, you know, person out of it, and it was just the two of them kind of getting through it. And the footage was actually a little more authentic and a little bit more personable. Didn't quite have the cinematography factor to it, but it felt more like real footage. So we got a lot of good stuff at the end of the film there before they reached the summit of that climb, and it was just the two of them. So yeah, point being, you know, choose your crews carefully and just know that, you know, you get footage on your own with your iPhones and your GoPros. You know, story is king, and you can get great authentic footage just with what you shoot and what the story is that you're trying to tell. So.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned free solo, which I think a lot of, you know, viewers who maybe aren't already in the adventure film space, that was their point of entry to movies of this nature. I remember watching it, and it acknowledges a ton of risk, but I left the movie thinking I should go sign up for a rock climbing class. So within the context of more and more people entering the backcountry, maybe for the first time or maybe after a long time away, again, is responsibility the right word? Is there a responsibility to communicate the risks and the safety considerations, Michelle?
Yeah, I mean, you know, even after, like, I remember my mom watched Free Solo, and, you know, she's almost 80 years old. She's never been rock climbing in her life, and, you know, she watched it, and she was on the edge of her seat the whole time, and she still didn't understand how hard that climb actually was, and to do it without a rope. I mean, she couldn't really grasp the concept of how hard climbing is, and even though that was an incredible film and it won an Oscar and everything, you know, it is really hard to tell the story of how hard something is when you're not actually physically doing it. So actually, I did bring my mom out rock climbing the next time she visited, and we did this like 5-5 route on limestone, you know, near at the pup tent in Newcastle, and she couldn't get like she couldn't get 3 feet off the ground. I mean, and then she had like this whole other understanding of, oh my gosh, like this is so hard. I can't even do like a stool step off the ground to try to do this rock climb. So I think it is important, you know, when watching films of that nature, is to kind of, you know, also inspire your audience to try it out in a safe manner, and then it gives you like this whole other perspective to see exactly what it is that they're doing and experiencing. Like, you have to really feel and touch something. Even if you have one of the best films in the world, it's important to go out and do it in a safe way rather than just watch it. So,
Pete, I'd love your thoughts on this as well, especially as somebody who has done things that are extraordinarily physically grueling in order to get the shot.
Yeah, and I've been that guy that has. I'm usually the one running the cameras, and so I've always been maybe confident, overly confident, that I could keep up and not slow down people I was filming. But on my Grand Canyon project, I actually, in just 5 days, I turned into kind of a shriveled mess. I came down with an incident that's a very dangerous, where it's the opposite of dehydration. It's low electrolyte imbalance in your body. It's called hyponatremia. And I became very hyponatremic, and suddenly the camera guy was the guy that was slowing everybody down. And it taught me a great lesson on self-reliability, self-efficiency, know your systems. I went back and finished the project thereafter with just one camera and one lens, so I could be more efficient and lighter. I had too much camera weight. But again, it goes back to your line about check the ego. I came in with a little bit of attitude, thinking, how hard could this be? It's hiking in the Grand Canyon. Again, there's more people had stood on the surface of the moon than had walked that walk at the time. So it was far harder than I anticipated. But it's taught me, and I think what's very important in today's world, as we have more access and more desire to get out into the outdoors, which is great, is self-reliability. Just because you have better access to rescue systems, be self-reliant. Whenever you hit that SOS button, you're putting other people at risk. So if you're running cameras or not, or you're the athlete, be aware and totally don't, the joke is safety third, but really make safety number one, top priority. And I think that's more important today than ever, because I've lost too many friends in the backcountry, and I've actually had friends get injured going out to rescue other people. And there's a lot of cases of that happening in this valley in particular. So self-reliance, humility, and awareness of your systems, of whatever you may be doing. And then again, being able to be like, I don't feel comfortable, this is not safe. Be communicative, be unafraid to talk how you feel too.
Awesome. Well, I'm so grateful that all of you gave your time today and were so open about your thoughts. Just as we wrap up this conversation, I'm curious how filmmaking and storytelling has changed your own relationship with your surroundings, or changed the way that you see the outdoors. Pete, we'll start with you.
Well, that's a good one. I think for me, it's cameras have been a passport to the outdoors, to the world. I'm grateful for that. But what I think they've taught me most is to go out, and touches back on what Michelle said, is to be present. Often when I'm out filming or shooting, it's forcing me to be in that moment, to look for that moment, whether it's wildlife or a glimpse of humanity, be entirely focused on that. And then also know when not to shoot. That's one lesson I learned at National Geographic. Know when to put the camera down and make a mental image, or just meet somebody on an eye-to-eye level, not through a lens. And so I think filmmaking's taught me in many ways, in a weird way, a back doorway, how to be more present, more patient with the world around me.
Awesome. Sierra?
I would agree with all of that, but it's also connected me a lot more with my community and expanded my community a lot, which I'm really, really grateful for.
Fantastic. And Michelle?
Yeah, I mean, like what I was saying before, the connections that you make with people when you're sitting down with them and having a conversation, and when the camera's on, it puts this level of pressure on you and the person that you're filming, but it forces you to really engage and connect with them. And then just how intimate you have to be with the story when you're actually sitting down and editing. Like some of the projects that I edit, I never meet the people on camera, but because I'm building this story with them, I have this super kind of intimate, feel with them and making a story. There's a short piece I put on about a guy that I was editing years ago, and I felt very connected to him when I was editing it, and then it turned out he died, a week or two later. And then I went to the funeral ceremony, and I was there, and people were like, well, who are you? Like, we've never seen you before. And I'm like, well, I edited this piece. And because you spend so much time on the footage and listening to the person talking and listening to their story over and over and over and over again, I mean, it just creates this relationship that, feels real, but isn't really real, but it feels real to you, and then it feels real to the audience when they watch it. So it's kind of a trippy, like, fourth dimension thing when you make films and connect with them without even ever talking to the person. So
awesome. Well, thank you all. Let's have a round of applause for our fantastic panelists today. Well, thanks everybody. We'll be out there mingling around. If you want to sink your teeth into more documentary work about the backcountry and backcountry adventure, a lot of books to check out over the Explore Booksellers stand, and a great resource fair down there too. I'll throw it over to you, Greg.
Yeah, thank you again, Kaya, Pete, Michelle, and Sierra. What a treat. Yeah, thank you so much.